Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
However, there have been a certain percentage of this volume of reports that have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things.
3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
But other sightings apparently were taken more seriously.
And one in particular, an incident called the Rendlesham Forest Incident, also known as Britain's Roswell. This was in 1980, shortly after Christmas, when a few American airmen who were stationed in the UK reported seeing a UFO.
A huge, solid, diamond-shaped object they described as 100 foot long, hovering silently in the sky above them.
There is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone, whatever that means.
UFOs are real. This is a technology that is so far beyond anything that we have.
Reportedly appear to exhibit unusual flight characteristics, appear to demonstrate advanced technology.
ARROW is the culmination of decades of DoD, intelligence community, and congressionally directed efforts to successfully resolve UAP encountered first and foremost by U.S. military.
Welcome back to Disclosure Team with me, your host, Vinnie Adams. Now, today, I have an interview for you with Christian Peters. So Christian was the co-author of this article here. It's time to hear from social scientists about UFOs. So without further ado, please welcome Christian Peters. Christian, how are you?
Hi, Vinnie. I'm good. How are you?
Yes, not bad at all. Thank you. Well, listen, Christian, before we jump into kind of the article and what made you write it and your interest in the kind of UFO, UAP subject, if you could just give us a bit of a brief background about yourself, that would be great.
Okay. I'm a political scientist. I'm German. I'm the managing director of the Bremen International Graduate School of Social Sciences at the University of Bremen. My area of expertise has been over the year, it's been shifting a little. I've been doing political culture studies. I've published on religion and politics. My dissertation was on architecture, like states. I'm really talking about stones, not about institutions, and capitals. And lately I've touched upon the UAP phenomenon and its relationship to social sciences. And yeah, that's pretty interesting. I'm a painter, so I got a dual nature, like an art painter, and I've also started a little, it's kind of a startup on public health consultation. So I'm pretty busy these days.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So how did when did the UFO subject first kind of cross your desk or your interest, let's say?
Well, desk and interest is different because I think I've been interested in that forever. It's I kind of anticipated the question, and I really, for the past days, I looked into the past, and I think I've had the privilege of being brought up with science fiction literature from very early on. My father has been he's an ardent lover and still is of science fiction literature. So he kind of, like fathers do, they kind of introduce you with that soft little nudge to the topic. And so in my teens, I did much of the golden age, the classical science fiction. And interestingly, when in the past days, I really digged into that. Why is it that as a scientist, I'm rather drawn to the fringes than to the centers? Why did I always study, as a political scientist, studying architecture is not the most natural thing to do. So I always had that drive to look for, what are the margins of explanation that your science serves with, and that goes back all the way until I was a teenager. I remember that when I was a teenager, and I was brought up in a Catholic school, a Catholic boarding school, a rather like not super conservative, but kind of conservative. And I, as some sort of a protest against Bible studies and a rather conservative intellectual intake, I started reading this Charles Berlitz's The Bermuda Triangle and the Erich von Däniken stuff that was around at the time. I think it kind of primed me, and then it disappeared again. But through science fiction, through this kind of early programming, I think I made my way through, and then in 2019, I remember as being, when you're a social scientist, you want to read the big newspapers because that's what you talk about. So I remember reading the New York Times, and that's when the Ryan Graves article came out through Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal. And then I thought, wow, what is this? It's the New York Times. I mean, it's like how these things work. It's a prestigious place. It's, known for its incredible, serious fact-checking institutional programs that they have, and they really do have like large sections that go through all the facts in these articles because a reputation depends on that. And then I realized that something is going on, and ever since, and then I started, reading Leslie Kean. I had in late 2019 what you would probably call my book encounter. That's like Diana Pasulka framed that really rightly. I thought it's I never saw a UFO, but I read that book that really changed things, and that's when I read John Mack for the first time, his abduction series. And they have been intellectually interesting because, first of all, of course, like Avi Loeb and like these scientists, they come with a lot of reputation. So and also like Gary Nolan, I would say from a social science perspective, you would say they really have a lot of capital to lose by investing to the UAP topic, because they have built up that whole reputation based upon like the rigorous way that science is being done and what's considered as normal and as acceptable as a topic, and still you've got these people like John Mack who were doing the studies. And I really like that one little story about him when he really realized that there is something like a pattern in what he's been observing as a psychiatrist with these people, repeating the same story about the abduction, about the things that were showing up, and being a Harvard scholar, he had very good contact. So obviously he was friends with Thomas Kuhn, who is a very famous historian of science. He's super known in the humanities and the social sciences, and he wrote a book on the structure of the scientific revolution, and at the time he was already known, and John Mack came up to him and said, Thomas, I see these things, and it seems like these people are neither, they're not fantasizing things, they are sane, they have serious, like solid biographical backgrounds and education-wise. So there is nothing I can see that would say that this is, a mental psychopathy. They are traumatized by something, and I can't explain what it is. But they say it's aliens. So, what should I do? And Thomas Kuhn said to John Mack, don't make your mind up. Keep on researching. And when I read that in 2020, I realized, it's risky to dive into it, but in a sense, I got really brought closer to the topic, and that's what I keep doing.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. And I mean, we've seen the subject just seems to continuously grow when it comes to the conversation in the mainstream and with scientists and academics. But the social sciences, we haven't seen it kind of play much of a role historically. And so maybe like you could just sort of talk about how social science could be applied going forward to help, whether it be reducing stigma or any kind of play a part in any of the subject.
Sure. With pleasure. I think there maybe, it's kind of hard too early. It's too early to say, this and that would be the way. We're really right now, as you rightly said, we are in a phase where it becomes legitimate to talk about that stuff. And I can tell you, I mean, you're in the UK, and a lot of people I have contacts to are in the United States because, with Greg Egigian, my colleague who I wrote that piece with, I mean, they have a platform in Germany. It's crickets, literally. It's not even crickets, but I realize that I'm a major challenge to my colleagues at the moment, because they realize, so here's this guy who has a Scientific American piece, which is, that's quite a currency in science. Scientific American is, it's a well-known outlet for scientific information. So they realize there seems to be something to it, because Scientific American wouldn't just probably go on and publishing anything. But at the same time, it's about UAPs and UFOs. And in Germany, that really brings people to situations where they don't know how to behave. And they do what people do in that situation. They start, ridiculing it. I got a good self-esteem, so I can totally live with that.
Right.
But it's really funny to see how the stigma works. Having said that, I wanted to go back to the social sciences. I think there are, at this early stage, I would say there are 4 points of entry for the social sciences, where we could kind of, help for the whole process of talking about the UAP phenomenon that doubtlessly exists in a more structured way, because there are a lot of pitfalls and a lot of frictions in the public discourse, and when it turns into a political phenomenon, there's a lot of stuff happening, and it's right now that needs to be considered. I think that the social sciences can help. They would not only talk about the UAP, because I think that and we wrote that in this article, they're not made for explaining whether it's true or not, or diving into the physical reality of that. That's not what the social sciences are. The social sciences are about societies, about institutions within societies, and that's about the human side of things. But still we're we observe a lot, and as such, I think we can help with the communication process, but we can also address a couple of questions that are related to the phenomenon, even in the stronger or the more narrow sense, as being somewhat related to a extraterrestrial hypothesis or a non-human intelligence phenomenon, wherever that intelligence might come from. Before I do that, though, I need to make a disclaimer, not because I would be shy or timid or something else, but because it's my conviction. My conviction is, as a scientist, that this process needs to go through the mills of science. And I know that people kind of regret that science is conservative and tends to marginalize certain standpoints. That's true, and that's the nature of the whole game. But at the same time, still, the science process is the only solid way to arrive at information that is, in a way socially relevant and can bring people together and create compromises and guide us through situations where we really don't know what we're facing with, be it the UAP phenomenon, be it climate change, be it the emergence of artificial intelligence as a social actor, because people, people will talk to programs like ChatGPT and they will develop relationships. So that's going to change things. And we are very insecure about how to deal with that. And I guess science needs to, create the guardrails to help us navigate through that. So having said this, I believe in the science process, and I hope everybody else in your audience do as well, because this is very, very important to not also let the UAP topic fall into a terrain which is, about disinformation, about, A says this, B says that, and then they start to battle publicly, and a lot of energy is produced, negative energy, and still people are attracted by that, like staring at it like it was a traffic accident. We have these sort of tendencies to follow those red threads. So also, I have never seen a UFO, unfortunately. I'm not an experiencer. I've talked to a lot of scientists who have backgrounds in that, and some of them are, came public. I haven't. I wish I had, because what I've seen with those scientists who are telling that story is that they seem to have an incredible energy when it comes to the topic. It's almost like an obsession. They really. I once talked to a friend of mine about, like the types of people, dealing with the UAP subject in science. And I said, there is the experiencer. There is, people like me who are kind of interested by things that are beyond the normal, fringy. And then there is friends and relatives of experiences. And they usually are, because the experiences are so strong with the energy that they lead them on that track. Okay, now that was a lot of around the topic. So I haven't seen an UFO. So I'm an agnostic in the sense of the what it actually represents, where it comes from, and I have no answers. I might have tendencies, but they are more or less irrelevant to the discussion, to the public discussion, because the public discussion should be along the rules of generating information. So how can social scientists generate information and analysis? I think they can do, as I said, there are 4 kinds. The first one being sort of a traditional way of doing that. Like social science has, forever done things with the tools that they have at hand. They have methodologies. There is something like qualitative or quantitative methods, where you rather look at what people say, or you look at, how often do certain people say certain things. So you can start surveys and then people would be asked, what do you think about the UAP topic? And if there was something like an extraterrestrial intervention, would you fear it or wouldn't you? And then you correlate that with data on socioeconomic backgrounds or in political orientations. And, you see starting patterns are emerging, and you can learn from that. That's kind of traditional social science. There is one study which I would like to do, kind of shortly coming back to John Mack, in that rather traditional way. Something that always struck me is, I think he was one of the first ones that was talking about the so-called ontological shock.
Yeah.
As the experience of the ultimate alien changes things for people, because they suddenly, as if a window opens to, a reality becoming a little more fragile or opening up, and different options. And that has, according to Mack, the power to, turn people's priorities and values sort of upside down. And he observed that, people have changed through the abduction phenomenon, with the abduction being the moment of the ontological shock. And having, like new concepts, thinking differently about the role that they play ecologically as, part of the system, and become aware of the fragility of our environment. And, as in the Ruva case, it's literally communicated. And what I would like to do as a social scientist, I would like to see, we have something that you call longitudinal study. So you look at people's development, social development, value, preferences, and political orientations through a longer time. And you could do that by having an experiencer and looking at their biography, telling according to standard models, this and that is going to happen in the future. And then you could have the moment of the turning point, which would be the experience, the sighting, the abduction, or whatever, and then see, does those people's lives, do they really change, and in what direction do they change, and can you say that the change is only according to that they keep on talking about the moment of abduction or of sighting or seeing a UFO or talking to extraterrestrials, or is there something else showing up? And I think these are studies that are classical social science, but they could be telling a lot, and I think they haven't been done yet. Right. So whenever you want to ask questions, you ask. Otherwise, I just keep going.
No, it's great. I like it. I like it. But the article also highlights 3 pressing issues in particular, which is intelligence, trust, and research ethics. So if you could just kind of touch upon each of them and elaborate slightly. Thank you.
It's the perfect moment to ask, because that is the second. That's the second route. I think what we did in that article is what you would call something like it's a social science of the UAP. It's less conservative, like the first way. It looks at the UAP topic and realizing that it has a quality of its own. It's not to be compared to other typical processes. Obviously, something goes on that is, emergent. Something happened, and now we have something new, and what would those traces be? What would those new phenomena be? And how could a social science address those issues, identify them, address? In that article, we mentioned that the social sciences could serve well in talking about these 3 aspects, because AI, I talked about that before. I really think that there is a structural analogy between the AI topic and the UAP topic, because in a sense, both of them represent the idea that there is a non-human actor that we're going to face. And it's not a dolphin, and it's not, a primate. It's something that is equally intelligent and probably, and that's what binds them together, the 2 cases, it's more intelligent than us. And we are, people react on that. I mean, Vinny, you have an idea what's the first reaction being confronted with something that's more intelligent?
I mean, it's fear a lot of the time.
There you go. There you go. It's about fear, and people react in certain circumstances under certain pressures quite homogeneously when it comes to fear. So, seeing those analogies could. Firstly, it could be interchangeable. You can use what you learn about the UAP topic in the anticipation of what strong AI could do to future mankind. But also, I think there is a second route, which probably has to do with the fact that, if most of us think of aliens looking like Spock, which is something, by the way, when you asked about my past, I think that irritated me from the first time I looked at Star Trek, is why do all aliens look like Spock? That makes no sense. I mean, I guess it was due to the budget they had at the time. They could not create something that looked extremely otherworldly. But, from all that we know, the idea that, an intelligent life that evolved in different star system under different conditions, what are the chances that they really would look like us, and even as close to us as those gray aliens do? that kind of never really convinced me. So I find it more probable, and there is good work that was done. Stephen Dick, he's a historian that worked for NASA. I totally recommend to your audience to look into his books. They're really they were talking about the SETI project. So most of the research with astrobiologists and historians and philosophers that was done in the context of SETI, but of course that applies to the UAP topic. And he wrote a couple of articles where he said that it's much more probable that that if we would be in first contact with an alien species or a non-human species that would have been around for quite a long time, it's much more probable it's post-biological. They would have done the same that we did. We realized our DNA, I mean, it's great, but it kind of leads to a dead end unless you totally optimize that. But still, it wouldn't be, like a silicon brain that lasts forever. That's cooler, because it lasts forever.
Sure.
Anyway, so this is the AI topic. The trust topic, I think, is a crucial one, and it's crucial because it, when we're talking about UAP, we're talking about a topic that has connections to the idea, probably represented in the Grush case, that governments do know things because governments are the ones that are observing the skies in a professional sense because they depend on that when it comes to security. And so the whole US story about how technology and information on contact is being kept behind. So your channel is called Disclosure Team. So the idea of disclosure and the idea of transparency, of getting to the core to it, hearing about the truth, that, these are good values by all means, but when it comes to the concrete reality of that, it's not that easy. And I hate to say that, but we know in political science, we know something that's called the transparency paradoxon. And that is that, a state is under pressure because people are suspecting that they're doing this and that in a bad sense. So they promise transparency. Transparency is implemented. So people then get into the situation, they can look deeper and they realize, oh man, there went some money into black projects here, and they never talked and they were never held accountable, and all these little misdeeds that were maybe even in conflict with the Constitution come up, people learn about them, and so the result of the transparency process is not more trust in the government but less trust in the government, because people realize things are going weirdly. And I think that could also apply to the UAP topic, because things might come out. I don't know, but let's hypothesize about that. Let's play that a little. Things might come out that might be seriously irritating. And that is the Grush narrative, the frame of it. And if that's the case, I mean, what would be the consequences? It wouldn't be that we're in a situation where, we're, concerned about, discussing the truth now. No, we would be confronted with a whole issue of, maybe disorganization, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, it could be that the situation after the transparency process and disclosure is much more complicated than it was before. So, you're really, and that's why social scientists are saying that the most probable, if there was anything like a disclosure process, the most probable thing would be some sort of a drip, drip, drip process where controlled little particles of information come out and they would change the narrative framework. Still, I think there is a lot of stuff to be concerned about, and I see social scientists as being particularly equipped to talk about that. And when it comes to research ethics, we're doing that all the time. I mean, if I'm the managing director of a graduate school, so in my institution, people are getting their PhD.
Right.
So, and then they would, let's say they're going to do a project on, the use of social media in some sort of a Mideast country where there is a lot of conflict going on.
Sure.
And people go and talk to other people, and my researchers didn't go through a serious education when it comes to research ethics, and then they would, and they come with clear names of people that they had interviews with, and they publish that stuff. So what's going to happen if somebody has an eye on that? They would realize, oh man, this and that guy, they've been involved in politically involved, and that could be to the harm of the people involved. So you need to have a very, very clear idea about when you're raising data, who you're raising data for, what it is it related to individuals, people's prosperity, and what's being done with that. And social sciences have kind of developed on that, and I think that's a pretty important point. Also, when it comes to the integration of, I think it gets really important when it comes to the integration of what has been done already. Now, here is an important point. I really think that the UAP topic is not new. Books have been published forever, and people were disencouraged to do, but still Donald Kehoe and those heroes, they kept on working. They published, they worked, they Stanton Friedman, they raised data however you would want to evaluate that from like a hardcore scientific point of view. But there is a lot of information out there, databases, on, I don't know, electromagnetic resonances. And I know people in Germany that have incredible data, collected and gathered in 30, 40 years. That's relevant information. We need to work with that, but it needs to be integrated into the system. That's a challenge. So that's a challenge that needs to be integrated. So how are you going to do that? What are the standards that you're going to raise to integrate that and make that, accessible to classical science that does its thing according to the rules it knows, and without neglecting the work that has been invested? So in a sense, I think it's very important to work with that. But it'll raise a couple of issues. I mean, how was that data raised? And is it, research ethically correct? And how can we integrate that? So we are facing a lot of challenges, but I think we could be well prepared. And if you have a couple of more minutes, I can even give you another one, because that was just the second type of study where I think that the social sciences could do a innovative social science of the UAP topic, and find out new stuff, talking about transparency, communication processes, how are taboos constructed, and how do you how do you deconstruct them? How can we get beyond the point that I'm in? My colleagues are, I mean, they're probably, they don't even, disrespect me. They just don't know how to react in that situation. And what you do, you make a joke. You run away or you make a joke. That's the two options you have. and so we need to understand that and to live with that. But for this second type of UAP research, I wanted to say one last thing, because I think that's something that we're going to see very often in the near future. From what I understand is that at the moment there are crucial progresses being made on how you can use what you call large language models. That's the ChatGPT data. They're looking at databases and correlating words that were said in so and so many million cases in the internet, in written texts, and reconstruct plausibility of communication. that's why ChatGPT is so fascinating. It's just a statistical tool that is working really well. It's got a great algorithm. And they're combining that, like the possibility that this machine is producing with something that we called agent-based modeling in the social sciences. It's a way to model certain decision processes or reactions of groups, and we've been doing that for a very long time. But since the computers were not that really good, they were rather not very complex in the simulations that they did. So they were, for example, assuming that everybody is what we call a homo economicus in the social sciences. That means all decisions being made by people are subject to an evaluation of advantages and benefits. But that's not how we are. We're more complex than that. We're irrational and we got emotions, and things get a little, murky there. But if you combine those two models of a generative agent-based modeling and the large language models, you come into a situation where you can really simulate discussions. You can create standpoints that are realistic, but you don't need people. So it's like for the social sciences, that's an incredible change of the game, because you could literally come into a situation where you can simulate, for example, how would the city of New York react if suddenly like a large spaceship appears, and it'll be a lot of work to program that, but you can then simulate that stuff. So in a sense, what I'm saying is social sciences using computational social science methods could, within the next 4 or 5 years, maybe come into a situation where we're capable of, simulating certain issues and first contact, or what some people say, everybody's going to go batshit crazy. Of course, excuse me if I say that, and people, humanity is going to react immediately. There will be 15 new religions created, with all sorts of irrational behaviors publicly. You don't know that. Other people are saying, oh gosh, we're pretty adaptable. People probably won't care unless, their lives are really concerned. And I have no idea. I know some of my colleagues do have rather apocalyptic conceptions about what's going to happen. I think there is a lot of reason to be really, really concerned about what would happen if first contact or disclosure, at least, the public awareness of something else would strike a society that is unprepared. But I have no idea, literally. I can't tell.
No, I think I've come across this so many times that there will be people who still wake up, they go to work tomorrow, they've got bills to pay, and it's almost just, okay.
I know.
And they carry on. But then you have that other end of the spectrum, like you said, where people suddenly think, oh my goodness, life is going to change completely, and we've got to be fearful of this. So I think everything in between as well. It's something I come across all the time.
Yeah, it's true. I think it's so hard to say, because what we are really having a hard time with is to imagine the change. People probably, if you're, if you make it a dry experiment, you go, you could do that. You go to people and interview them and say, oh, by the way, did you hear that, an alien spaceship was discovered? It would be fake, but then you can check how will people react. And if you have a certain, that's unethical research, so people should not take me serious here. But, you would find out how would people react. And probably the reactions would be quite rational. They wouldn't start crying, and they would say, oh, that's interesting. I will look that up. It'll come up on Instagram or wherever.
Yeah.
But, if that, and that, might encourage other researchers to think that we are quite resilient to change and adaptable, which is true. Cultures are incredibly adaptable on the long run.
Sure.
Humanity has adapted to, that's the big thing. We can, others can't, animals can't, they cannot change the environment. We do. But that's, sometimes this came at enormous costs. And if you look at the past, being contacted, the analogy, of course, is looking at, I mean, the Spanish invading Southern America. That's a confrontation of a highly developed technological civilization contacting another one that is also quite developed. It's not as unbalanced as people would say, but at least one of those partners in that game, the coming out was really devastating, but still, I mean, humanity survived, and of course, it was a question of power that was involved there as well when it came to the conquistadores, and a very sad one too, historically speaking. But what I wanted to say is that there is a lot of things that you can't anticipate, and things might change so people would not be overwhelmed in the moment of first contact. But then, what would be the consequences for the stock market? Because, the stock market is pretty reactive to new information about technological change. So either, I don't know, and the next information is, and by the way, they have free energy, because they cracked the vacuum space, or whatever those words are being used here. That would probably have serious impact. And then this is going to have impact that we literally cannot anticipate. There could be an enormous unemployment that is related to that disruptive power on the stock market, because Exxon and all those guys, suddenly they lose their platforms. And, what are the consequences of the inequality and the insecurity and the I don't know, the lack of a vision? And then these could add up and develop energies that we literally cannot really anticipate at the moment. So I'm having a hard time there. So having said that, I wanted to say that there is a third kind of social science that deals with the UAP topic, which actually is my favorite one. I kind of feel most comfortably in it. I've written in it. I've written an article on that. It's related to what you call epistemology. So that's the science of how do we know certain things, how the human being knows that there is color, that there are other people, and how is knowledge produced, and how does it reach us, and how is it stored. And so it's a philosophical discipline, but something that comes with the UAP topic, both in the sense if it would come out to be something that is related to a non-conventional explanation, or just as a cultural phenomenon. The topic is, it has been fringy because it opens up options that are contrasting what we could consider as, mainstream of knowledge production. I don't know. One of the main arguments why the Fermi paradoxon is the Fermi paradoxon is that classical physicists, and I'm not a physicist at all, would come up and say, Einstein told us that, you can never reach something that is faster than the speed of light. So therefore, a transgalactical empire is not conceivable, because it's just the time distance between the stars or the clusters where things are too big. So this is, that's where we're at. This is the discussion standard. There are daring physicists who are talking about things that I don't understand, and when it comes to the quantum world, things get blurry for me anyway. I should really stop talking about that, because I really have no expertise. But I don't find it, at least, like super unconvincing to consider that if science progresses in the way that it has over the past 150 years, there might be options that we don't know. So sure. In a sense, the UAP topic represents that. It immediately represents or incorporates the idea of looking into our own future what is possible if we sustain 150,000 years? If the UAP would be a representative of that survival of a different race, maybe we could be there as well. So in that sense, it's a threat to where we are at the moment. So the UAP topic is about, it's about innovation. It's also about like the not normal. And I am interested as a researcher in those knowledge production processes, because you can see in those things how we're creating normality and how we're treating something that challenges normality. And that's something that social scientists are pretty good at doing, and they've been doing that all the time, because you call that constructivism, looking at the conviction that what we consider a scientific process and as like the real, this is where we are, that's a function of a historical production. It's been produced by people that did that under certain circumstances that are correlating to the environment, to the religious thoughts about the perceptions of reality, what we consider that the universe is there a God, and blah, 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 blah. So these are all embedded in cultural environments that are presenting the thinkable and also the unthinkable. And this process, that is something that fascinates me, because the UAP, in many senses, is a figure where that crystallizes, and I'm convinced that people are dealing, allergically in a cognitive sense with the UAP topic when they are very dependent on having their own position in a very clear environment where the map is, neatly painted and everybody knows what's normal and what's not. So, this kind of the epistemological aspect of the UAP topic, that's something that fascinates me a lot. And you could do, you can do a lot of studies, and there is studies that are being done on that. I learned that there is a discipline. I mean, it's not a discipline, you can call it that way, but it's, there are people who are looking at the idea about, how would an alien mind function if it needed to develop under certain, biologically evolutionary aspects. And it's interesting. The outcomes of that are fascinating, because what we think that rationality and the height of how we're thinking about the universe, that's pretty conditional on our own biological history. I reading a book by the wonderful biologist Edward Wilson, I was surprised about the fact he said that there is no animal in the whole in the whole on Earth that is as curious as the human being is. But there is also no other animal. That's no surprise, because we're intelligent and we're doing research and blah, blah, blah. But there is no other animal that is so concentrated on studying its own kind. So, and he explains that in a book that literally by, you can find that out biologically speaking, that our attention for other human beings and for the behavior of other human beings is incredibly heightened. So we're literally permanently observing ourselves. Said that, I don't find that very fascinating or surprising, that all our conceptions about what other intelligences are pretty anthropomorphic, because we're permanently thinking about ourselves. We're conditioned by the way that we think about ourselves. Even if we, how would a social science about a non-terrestrial intelligence not be anthropomorphic? Because all the tools that we've developed are developed by looking at human people. That's the only thing that we've ever had. And are there ways out of that anthropocentric fallacy? That's also that's a bias that is built in that is really hard to overcome. I mean, I think you can, you can progress, you can train yourself to say, okay, now you're thinking a human thought, you need to think differently.
Yeah.
And that's the third section where I think that the social sciences could help. The fourth one would be, what's the meaning of UAP? I think that's what philosophers and religious scholars are already talking about. But yeah, that's kind of the spectrum.
It's amazing. It's fantastic. And it's, when the article came out at the start of October, it really stood out to me, and I know it did to a lot of other people. What's the response been generally, whether positive or negative? Has there been any sort of standout responses?
I mean, how would you measure the success of such an article? I would probably say the standard measurement for science would be, you're preaching to the unconvicted. Is that an English saying? Preaching to the convicted? I mean, you're praying to your own bubble. Within my own bubble, that's the people who have been thinking about the UAP topic. The resonance was great. Talking to the outside, I think it has played for some people a certain role, but I can tell whether by what we've written or by the fact that it appears in Scientific American, and you can be pretty pragmatic about that. Normalization is appearing in the big newspapers and talking to with a reasonable voice, having an academic title and managing director and this and that. So that plays a role in the normalization process. I'm not sure if I have convinced somebody by anything. I think the article makes a couple of points that are pretty relevant in saying that we have to take that serious as social scientists, whether we believe in it or not. But it's there. You have a whole, I mean, it's incredible. You have a 65-page addendum on the household that is a UAP Disclosure Act, and it's driven by one of the most prominent Democrats who has been in politics for 45 years. He's a dinosaur. He knows everything. That doesn't happen, without any context. Whatever that context is, I don't know, but at least I think it matters. Another thing which is interesting about the feedback that we've gotten is, that's a telling one, is I've gotten some critique by some people. I wasn't really surprised about being critiqued, and I think it addresses the subtitle of the article, saying whether or not UFOs exist. Right. And people are saying, gosh, now here they mainstreamed by that was pressure put on them by Scientific American. No, not at all. The question is, of course, we're talking about UFOs not in the sense of an Hynek's unidentified flying object, but in the stronger sense.
Sure.
And if you look at Merriam-Webster, probably you will find an explanation that involves the extraterrestrial hypothesis embedded in the use of the word UFO. So that's okay. So it's been the ufologists who are saying, oh man, you're doing not a favor to us. Something I find interesting is, and I'm sharing this with you, Vinny, and your audience now, I learned not so long ago that there was a big conference happening in Europe where a university would have invited people to talk about the UAP topic. I thought I was invited too, but I couldn't because I have an art exhibition at that weekend. But I thought, wow, that's that's pretty progressive. A lot about consciousness, and so I was surprised that the university admitted. And the next thing I hear is that the whole conference is canceled, and a lot of people were involved already, and big shots and people who traveling over from the United States and blah blah blah. And I thought, okay, now the university probably, somebody talked to the deans and they got cold feet.
Sure.
The fact, though, is that the intervention goes back to an intervention by a UFO society. It was a UFO society who addressed the university's leadership, according to what I've heard. It's been kind of confirmed. but I'm not going to drop names here. But accordingly, they were informed by a UFO organization. So now I thought, why are they doing that? Here's a chance. Why would they intervene? And how does that relate back to your question, how the resonance was? I think some of the harshest critics of what we're doing are the ones that have been in the field for quite a long time. And that is really equally interesting. And that's why I said before that we really need to work with the work that has been done in ufology. Because if there is a confrontation, now the big guys come in, science does its thing. And, you guys, you have no idea about what you've been doing. That is, first of all, I think it's a very unpositive response to what people have been investing over the years and decades. Secondly, it's going to close a lot of knowledge doors because a lot of, witness reports, those institutions did the ground job, the groundwork, the empirical work over decades. But I was surprised about the fact that the hardest critique comes from the guys who should be your friends. But I think that's probably part of the knowledge process that was to be expected. And I hope that we can maneuver through without hurting people left and right.
Yeah, completely agree. And I'm just going to reiterate one more time to anybody watching or listening, please go and read the article. It's called "It's Time to Hear from Social Scientists About UFOs." I will pop a link in the description of this video for you to go and check that out. And Christian, please stay in touch and keep us updated with any further work that you do, because I find it completely interesting and fascinating. And I really appreciate you joining me today.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. And I'm, as I said already before, I love to talk about that. It's something that's kind of close to my heart. I'm doing sort of science fiction stuff in my job. Oh, that's pretty cool. So
yeah, absolutely.
Take it easy.
Yeah, thank you. And everyone watching, we'll see you on the next one.